Democratic Congresswoman from Virginia, Abigail Spanberger, joins us now from Capitol Hill. Congresswoman, thank you so much for your time. Let's just start with whether or not you have any indication if you're going to be called back this evening for a vote on the House floor for a new speaker.
The answer to your question is we don't know. We have been advised that we might be called back for a vote this evening. Certainly, Congressman Jordan lost additional votes when we went from the first vote series to the second vote series. And since that time, there's been additional Republican members of Congress who have come out publicly stating that on a third vote, they would abandon their prior support for him. But it seems that he is not yet willing to concede that he does not have 217 votes. And so the possibility remains that we might have a third failed speaker vote this evening.
Okay, so a third failed speaker vote, as you're now projecting on the air. If that's the case, and we have no reason to believe that that isn't true, and we have Republican members, Congresswoman, telling us on a regular basis that no one in their conference can get to 217. Are you prepared as a Democrat to have a conversation about empowering Patrick McHenry to start working as a real speaker?
The reality is we've been having conversations for weeks on the Democratic side of the aisle with our Republican colleagues, direct conversations. Hakeem Jeffries put out an op-ed. Some of our colleagues put out an open letter providing a whole variety of options for how we might be interested or able or focused on moving forward. The reality is the House has so much work to do, and we need to get those things done. A farm bill, security aid to Israel, security aid to Ukraine, funding our government, focusing on border security. The list goes on and on and on. And to be able to actually bring bills to the floor and pass them has to be our priority. So as it relates to what we are willing to do, I and so many of my colleagues are interested in pulling together a coalition to actually get work done. And if the way that we do that is by expanding the authorities of a temporary speaker, I think that is a wholly viable option that exists on the table.
So you'd be in favor of that individual being Patrick McHenry? You have no qualms with him?
Not specific to him, no. I think, certainly the full scope of what it would be, what it would look like for him to have expanded authorities, and the full text of the resolution we would ultimately be voting on, that would determine my ultimate decision. But in principle, I'm a Democrat. I'm in the minority party. It is my expectation that we would have a Republican speaker. And what I, as a Democrat, expect out of a Republican speaker is somebody who's focused on governing, somebody who's going to bring bills to the floor for them to pass in the House, go to the Senate, and go to the president's desk. And that means someone who is inclined to vote for and bring bipartisan bills forward. And so if that looks like expanding on a temporary basis the authorities of a temporary Speaker McHenry, then, those conversations are ones that I have been having and continue to be open to.
Congresswoman, I'd like to speak to the former CIA officer inside of you as we ask you a couple of questions about the situation in Israel. President Biden is about to speak to the nation tonight, as you well know, addressing from the Oval Office, creating a sense of urgency around this supplemental budget request for Israel. As we consider the prospect of an invasion of Gaza City at any moment right now, I wonder, with your background, the concerns that you have about what appears to have been a major intelligence failure leading up to that terror attack and what it might mean for the days ahead.
Well, you highlighted I'm a former CIA officer. I was a case officer, and I collected information on terrorist threats throughout the world. I'm also now a member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. And so what I can tell you about how I've been looking at this, and certainly what we need to understand, is how is it that Hamas, a terrorist organization that we know has, control over Gaza, was able to get to the point where they could plan and then ultimately execute a terrorist attack of this size and scale within Israel. And that process of understanding how this could have happened will require, a full review of intelligence available, because were there perhaps links that could have been made or flags that should have been, red flags that should have gone up related to potential threats or worries that might have led people to realize that there was something so far along and so complex in scale and scope. Also, it helps into the future for us to look at, okay, so if it wasn't a lack of connecting the dots, what were the dots that were missing, right? It may not be a case of the information was there but not connected. Now we have a better understanding, and will, as they continue to do a review, of perhaps what information could have been collected that wasn't. But the reality certainly is that this is a horrific, large-scale terrorist attack that certainly any current U.S. intelligence community employee or officer, and certainly our counterparts in Israeli intelligence, are just continuing to reel at the reality that Hamas was able to organize and ultimately carry out such a horrific massacre of civilians in their homes and in their communities.
The Pentagon today said an American destroyer in the Red Sea intercepted cruise missiles and drones from Yemen fired towards Israel. These are Houthi rebels, another Iranian-backed proxy group. They're also seeing drones in Iraq and Syria towards our bases there. How concerned are you about the risk that this conflict is going to spread wider in the region?
I'm very concerned about a potential spread of conflict. Certainly, we know that between, Hamas, or the terrorist organization that carried out this particular large-scale terrorist attack, or efforts by the Iranians to fund and further push forth their proxies, be they the Houthis or Hezbollah, and they're, of course, funding and support to Hamas over many years. This is a time of great instability, which is why it's extraordinarily important that the Biden administration has sent military personnel to the region, both as an effort of deterrence, demonstrating U.S. commitment to Israel, our ally, and demonstrated a commitment to maintaining stability in the region.
Well, assuming you do get a speaker at some point here, Congresswoman, will you vote yes on this idea, this supplemental request that could add up to $100 billion for Israel, for Ukraine, for Taiwan, and for border security? Is that what your constituents want?
The short answer to your question is yes, I am going to vote for it. And as to what my constituents want, my constituents, and I am proud to represent an extraordinary number of veterans, an extraordinary number of active duty service members, and an extraordinary number of folks who have an eye towards democratic values, what American global leadership means in the world. And I hear from my constituents that they want to ensure that our tax dollars are being spent wisely, but also that they want to ensure that we are supporting our allies in their effort to deter and stop the terrorist threat, as is the case with Israel, and to support our allies who are fighting for their own democracy, to stop Vladimir Putin and his authoritarian regime, and ultimately to uphold American democratic values.
Well, we'd like to continue that conversation with you when it finally happens, assuming it does. Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger of Virginia, thanks for coming back to talk to us on Bloomberg.